Hi everyone, I'm Aisha. I'm the Exhibitions and Programming Associate at Dunlop Art Gallery. Thank you for joining us tonight for the presentation by Jess MacCormack, a critical look at AI use in the arts. Following the presentation is a workshop with Jess, which some of you might have registered. We are looking forward to the results. Before I introduce Jess, I would like to start with a land acknowledgement. As we gather today, I wish to acknowledge this land on which we gather is Treaty 4 territory, the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, Saulteaux, and the homeland of the Métis Nation. Regina Public Library is committed to working together with Indigenous people as we take important steps towards on the pathway of collaboration, reconciliation, and change. Jess MacCormack is a queer, mad artist, activist, and white settler working on the unceded ancestral territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Their art practice engages with the intersection of institutional violence and the socio-political reality of personal trauma. Working with communities and individuals affected by stigma and oppression, they use cultural platforms and distribution networks to facilitate collaboration which position as art as tool to engender personal and political agency. Working in various mediums, graphic novels, digital art, performance, installation, video, and community art, their work explores queer politics, embodiment, and criminalization. They have MFA in public art and new artistic strategies from Bauhaus University 2008 and were an assistant professor of studio arts at Concordia University from 2010 to 2013. Jess is currently an instructor at Emily Carr University of Art Design and is working towards their PhD Contemporary Art at Simon Fraser University. Please welcome Jess MacCormack.
Thank you all for being here tonight, and thank you for inviting me to Dunlop. And yeah, I appreciate everyone coming out on this windy, cold day. So I'm going to give an overview of not how AI art is being produced in kind of the more capital A art ways that it occurs in art galleries and museums necessarily, but how kind of an AI art community bubbled up on social media and how people were using AI tools in new ways. I'll start though with a little introduction to my practice. I know a few of you know me, but many of you don't. So we'll start there. So if we go back a number of years, this is not the beginning of my art practice, this is just a number of years back. I'm looking at the aspects of my practice that were more digitally based. And so at the time, I was, I'm doing performance art, I was doing art projects in prisons, and I was also started this kind of digital practice, making GIFs and making collages and various things with online digital refuse that I found. So I was creating a bit of a dialogue. Now there will be some kinds of flashing images here. A dialogue on Tumblr with specific communities and people using images in a diversity of ways. And I was quite interested in how social media uses images as a way of negotiating relationships. So yeah, I was digging into various things that were happening at the time. Somewhere between like looking at trauma, looking at queerness, looking at humor, and politics at the time. Which was a lot of fun. So I was making these pieces and kind of every day it was just a little bit of a sketchbook type practice where I would just each day look at something and get inspired by something and then create one of these, and it ended up accumulating over time until I had these like hundreds of images. After that, I moved to a different kind of project where I was working in a collaboration with Thea McCloskey on something we call the D-Search Department. And it's a very complex project to explain because there was like many elements to it. But I'm just going to kind of introduce you a little bit to the ways we were using digital media and digital art within performance, installation, and various other manifestations. But it was a very satirical project. And so in 2017, we created the State of Exceptional Web Nation, which was an actually functioning social media site that was a satire of the way things are going in our world. So for the launch of that, we did this at the Western Front in Vancouver, where I'm currently living, although I wasn't at the time. And for each of our projects, we would have masks, these suits that we'd wear, these repetition walls of logos with their catch lines, kind of doing a critique of neoliberal capitalism and how we're all implicated within that. But this was the launch of the website, so it was also kind of mimicking the way that we used our site. So our site was basically, there was a force feed as opposed to the news feed. And it was a bit of a gamification where you could end up on different levels of the site depending on how far you went into it. And there would be different kinds of questionnaires and different ways we would want people to engage, and through the more you engaged, the more you'd collect identification cards. So each identification card meant you had more documentation, meant you had more access. So depending on where you were, as you can see at the top here, you have very little access, and at the bottom you suddenly have access to all these different kinds of activities. So these cards would be like auto-produced, that would have your IP address from your actual computer, and then the identity for you would be kind of constructed through a series of games as you entered into the site. Can't explain all of that right now, but this is an example of some of the kinds of quizzes that we had that you would have to do, and they were obviously deeply satirical. Yeah. And we had this kind of exercise routine that we had actually presented here in 2018, called the Yaga, which was a version of yoga that was really about being really flexible and saying yes to everything. And so we had this whole routine that you can find online if you're interested that teaches those exercise rituals, but it was embedded as well into our website. And this was, you'd have to kind of lift these emojis and report on your health, and of course the more you reported on your health, the more identity cards you'd get. But as soon as you uploaded your emojis to whatever you wanted to report, it would automatically go to the force feed. So you were also, as you were creating content, it would be automatically publicly available for everyone else on the site. So you get an idea of where we were going with this. Then you may be very confused at this point, and that's okay. That was also part of where we were going with this. So on your own homepage, you'd end up in this kind of prison-like state with tons of identity cards. And so this was an example of one of the identities on there, which was me, Dick Share. Okay, so that was just a little lead in to be like, I have a full art practice, been alive for a long time, and I got here somehow. So how did I get here? I, like many of us, use social media, and one day I started noticing these images popping up on my social media feeds from different friends and people I knew who were experimenting with DALL-E when it first came out. And so,
What is DALL-E?
Oh, DALL-E is a large language model. It's an image generator that uses AI to generate images. So, as you can see, the images were quite bizarre and interesting, and I was very curious as someone who had had such a large span of my art career working digitally. I was excited to try these things out. But I had been making graphic novels at that point for 5 years and wasn't doing the research department projects anymore, and I wasn't very active at all as a digital artist. So I was like, oh no, I missed the boat. This thing went right by me and I missed it. But that wasn't the case. In the early days, it was difficult to access these platforms. So you had to sign up and wait. It wasn't like you could just be like, I want to use this, and now you can. you had to be on a waiting list, and I don't know, some magical thing happened somewhere, and then you'd get access. And with Beth's work, I just thought it was super interesting, seeing the ways that she was creating these moments that felt like in the middle of a narrative of something quite surreal, but also very personal. And you get a sense of these kind of emotional states, even through the weirdness of everything else that's going on. So I had started experimenting with DALL-E 2 when that platform began. And it started having a kind of, the output suddenly became quite realistic and interesting. And what it's produced that I thought was really interesting was like material. And even though I've worked in so many different mediums, I've never worked in sculpture. So this was something where I was like fascinated by all the textures and the kind of, even though it's a 2D image, that it created this kind of very sculptural world, and obviously just weird and surreal. And for a lot of us at that time that were using AI, it was interesting to just see how weird it could get. And you know, this was now probably 4 years ago, and at this point, I've seen a lot of weird images. I'm kind of over it, but at the time, it was quite interesting. So I'm just going to read this little bit here. Working with AI image generators felt magical and addictive. The experimentation with this new quote-unquote medium created fantastical, surreal images quickly and with ease. It felt like a new form of collaboration with the collective unconsciousness. There is a gamification feel to working with large language models, image generators, as each prompt presents the user with 4 images. So if you put in a prompt, up come 4 different options. And from those 4 options, you get to choose, and like, you know, why do you choose and what, you know, why? But then from there, you can expand on that or shift that image. And it kind of reminds me of slot machines. Like you're like, go, this, that, and it produces dopamine in a similar way, I think. So these large language models also reflected all their training data, which were heavily biased. So, you know, you'd be like a woman doing something, and you'd automatically get a young, skinny, white, like a very, typical model-like figure would appear. And that to have anything other than that appear, you had to really push it. So you had to like heavily prompt, like I want a middle-aged black woman who looks normal or whatever, just trying to get it away from those biases. So that also felt like a bit of a game unto itself. Then the way I was using it was, I would start with, say, the image in the center on the right, and then expand out, and there was ways within DALL-E 2 that you could kind of choose where you wanted the frame to expand, but it was kind of indefinite, like you could keep going, and I was curious about what it would produce as it expanded out. So I didn't prompt and get these images. I would prompt to get a piece of that image and then expand to see where it could go. And of course, there's a kind of grotesque embodiment that I was interested in exploring. Specifically with DALL-E 2, you weren't allowed to talk about illness or sexuality. There was very clear words you could not prompt at all. So yeah, just trying to figure out how do I represent embodiment in a kind of different sense with such limitations. And I think what I was quite interested in is, like, I have an experience living with a dissociative disorder, and I was like interested in this kind of embodiment in relationship to dissociation. And I feel like a lot of our lives that are online are also spent dissociated from our bodies. And it's, even though that's like a personal thing, it's also collectively something we're dealing with. And I felt like AI did a very great job representing that experience. I also got really interested in creating this alternate version of The Simpsons called The Stimsons. And yeah, there was something kind of like weird and strange and trauma-filled with this landscape that I created in this new version of The Simpsons. Yeah, lots going on there. Another kind of motif I was interested in were like these kind of childlike playhouses, but with lots of people peeking out of them, so that there's this kind of strange collection of folks inside of a fort or a set for a kid's play or something like that. And again, working from Ondeli, starting with an image that I prompted and then expanding out to see what would build. And then I just got into these kinds of faces, which were, again, not what we normally expect from when we look in the mirror, per se. That talked about like a different way of perceiving being embodied. And yeah, kind of challenged notions around disability and around the grotesque and some Hello Kitty, because I'm obsessed with her. Anyway, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I was really just kept being fascinated by all the images that would be created, and I, just challenging myself to see like, okay, what other direction could I go in? What else could this do or not do? So, unlike me, who had a kind of professional art practice coming into this, many people who were not artists suddenly found themselves able to create images and eventually videos and songs without training in art, film, performance, or music. The tools allowed one to create outputs using text prompts. Many people who did not identify as artists suddenly found themselves able to create images, that's kind of the same phrase, in seconds without any training. This is because the tools allow one to create outputs. I'm repeating myself. Apologies. A proliferation of people playing with AI in interesting and lots of uninteresting ways grew on Instagram and created an informal community of experimentation. So at the time, it felt like just a handful of people doing interesting things, and we were kind of all looking at each other's work and chatting, and it created this kind of little community. And of course, the proliferation of AI and then AI image generation platforms suddenly just kind of grew exponentially, and there's like, suddenly there's just thousands of people doing this. And a lot, there's some people who are really kind of trying to play with the medium, and others who are just like, I can make a dragon look like it's flying, just excited at the possibilities of being able to illustrate anything you want. So these are two folks that collaborate together a fair bit, and a lot of people have their, channel names or whatever their avatar. What is that called? Yeah, who they are. So Dina and Melody go by Ethereal Whirl and Lamoon, and they together have created all kinds of works. But there's a lot of playfulness around like anxiety and creatures and childhood, with very specific kinds of aesthetics. And Dina's in New York and Lamoon's in France. They finally met last year after collaborating for multiple years together, and both of them are mothers. So they had this kind of interesting back and forth going. So what I found as a trend in this new wave of AI artists is that the excitement of these new tools has led to addictive behaviors that reflect the underlying conditions of mental health problems, frequently compounded by the isolation and alienation born of capitalism. The more we find ourselves down these rabbit holes online, the more we're not together in public space for lots of different reasons. I mean, COVID was a very broad example of that. Just this kind of isolation leading to a desire for connection and to be seen, and that, social media tends to prey on that quite literally. So being able to express ourselves creatively is a modality of healing as well. So I think I've noticed that a lot of the people who are interested in working in this way online are coming with anxiety disorders or other issues already at play that this kind of answers to in some ways. As we've already seen, this desire for connection, recognition, and virality within social media has led many people to performative extremes. So not in the AI world per se, but including many documented deaths where people performing on the edge of cliffs and whatnot, to push the boundaries and have this kind of sensational content for their channels, to get more likes. This is more from them. And now they create like full narrative videos, like what in the early moments, which was like half a minute ago, that we were creating images, there weren't accessible tools for creating video. And those shortly followed like a year later, and many people started creating quite elaborate video works. These two now like work for all the platforms, making all their advertising. So it's interesting to see also, you know, they get flown around to go to work for Adobe and different companies, where I like very much backed away from that idea of like that trajectory. AI image and video generators provide immediate satisfaction to all our compulsivity, which underlies the lack of community and resources in our tech oligarch-mediated societies. Being siloed off into echo chambers online has in many ways reduced our capacity to exist with others, difference, and conflict. This dissociation required to participate in living our lives online has opened up our psyches to ongoing manipulation. So, as we all know, Facebook has been selling our information for quite some time, and that, you know, advertisers figure out how to manipulate us quite strategically, while we're just trying to be like, I just want to feel connected to other people. This is an artist that goes by also Academie. She is in Singapore, and I was really fascinated by the kinds of works that she was doing. Again, these are people who didn't consider themselves artists before AI came along, but got very deeply into playing with the tools and creating works. This is more recent work. Yeah, a lot of people, in the early days, there was a lot of stuff on DALL-E. Over time, I noticed many people switching to Midjourney, including myself. There's so many other platforms and apps and large language models to be used, and I don't understand them all by any means. I'm not that technically inclined. So I think many people have found themselves lost in the gaps of society, which is amplified by social media and contemporary politics. And AI feels like the perfect outlet and distraction to participate in processing our inner worlds and offering it to others, myself included. Using AI tools can make us feel part of the whole again somehow. The recycled residue and wealth of information of the internet is available for direct dialogue. We can push our hands through the digital matter and it takes shape like other art materials, but with some sort of instant mastery, like a well-trained yet alien collaborator. The magic of text prompts being translated into unique images that quickly pop up before us proposes an uncanny reflection on our ideas and world. For many, the experimentation with text prompts formed a new practice. So how can we accentuate the flaws of AI images as a feature? So most people who were excited about AI weren't trying to make Hollywood type film with it. What they're interested in is how you'd end up with 10 fingers on one hand, or, as we saw earlier, my image is your mouth on your top of your head, like just the possibilities of, having a toad riding a bicycle across a shark, whatever you wanted, this kind of surreal imagery. And so I think where the companies themselves started to develop more and more towards gearing to fitting, for graphic design or feature-length films, they were driving their companies to become more mainstream and more normative. A lot of people were playing with them because they were interesting in the ways that they weren't doing that. So now there's a company called Sora, and it can make very lifelike, realistic films and images, and now, we can't really differentiate between the real and the completely artificially composed. This was someone I was collaborating with in the early days, and now is my frenemy, or nemesis, Nice Aunties. She was another artist who was in Singapore, and she started doing this work, but it just blew up online. So she was interested in looking at the Asian auntie figure and reconfiguring ideas about what that figure could be in a more feminist and powerful way. But yeah, she went really big and was doing TED Talks with The Guardian, and yeah, went quite far with this practice. I mean, her images are also very fantastical and wonderful. I will give her that. So yeah, here we have a map of a wave that I found online that shows the development of large language models. The past year I was working with Laura Marks at SFU University looking at the environmental impacts of AI and realizing how very damaging they are, but also that they're, as I saw in that world, they're being exponentially produced. So it's like, these are hundreds of models that are being developed and trained, and each time they're trained, the amount of environmental damage grows. So where am I going with all this? AI development is growing exponentially and feels impossible to actually keep up with, let alone to critique. So, you know, to continue an interest trying to follow what's happening just feels like you'd have to have 45 brains going at once. Like it's nearly impossible to kind of from day to day to even know, like platforms keep shifting, how the world is functioning, as we all have seen, is also shifting very dramatically. Yeah, and meanwhile, I was also, in the last couple of years, we've seen this genocide happening in Gaza that's also, you know, on my feed live happening every day. So I'm like, weird picture, and then it's like people, real people dying, and then cute cat, and you know, it's a bit baffling to how to like proceed. So this is not an answer to all those problems, but I did try and figure out, I was trying to think through ways of producing work using my digital imagery, showing at this point that I was making a lot of videos with AI. Yeah, finding ways to use those tools to be very critical, but also trying to find different ways to bring them into a physical space and think them through. You know, obviously this is pretty big juxtaposition given that these models are largely unethical and ruining the land. So, you know, to have this kind of thought process about where my politics are versus where these images and companies are going with them. And also I was just thinking about generally in Vancouver, protest culture versus the condo development and the way that things are being sold. So each, I mean, for all these different pieces, there was, they were kind of placard-like, but also had these sculptures that were holding the pieces up that were made from Amazon boxes, but with, I mean, it's fake fur, but I was trying to kind of make some sort of mashup between, you know, the idea of the fur trade versus today's Amazon domination. You know, talking about colonization, basically. Okay, there are many ethical questions with large language models. Were these models trained on all our stolen data? Yes, they were. Artists and activists started speaking out against the use of AI due to copyright infringement and the idea that artists' work were being copied. So there was a lot of, I mean, obviously people are well aware that there's a lot of people who are against AI, and then it seems like, oh, if you're using it, you're for AI. But there's not a lot of discussion of like the nuances of what is happening and what these companies are doing. But what I found difficult was that I 100% agree that people should be paid for their work, that there should be consent for their work to be used, and that we should be respectful of the land and ethical in our practices. But it seemed like a lot of people were like, their critique was more about the idea that, like, their belief about what art is, and thinking that art doesn't include sampling, which we know with rap, we know with hip hop, we know with collage. I mean, there's a wild history of sampling within contemporary art, but within all kinds of arts. So I found that difficult to navigate, where people were, their reason for being against AI wasn't necessarily about the ethical concerns. And here we have my friend Sam's work. He tends to push things a little bit more in your face with these things, but at the same time, you know, he works for the Kardashians and Gucci and does like major ad campaigns. So again, someone who just started, I mean, he had a practice before this in animation, but you know, starting off with just fooling around with these apps and then building an entire career out of it. This was a piece he did recently where he reconstructed the Last Supper, but with a black woman being Jesus. Yeah, so for me, questions of authorship within AI within AI use felt more like a gray zone. When creating with AI, you don't access an artist's mind or soul, but rather fragments, much more like collaging or sampling. I saw many people's intense beliefs of what art is being shaped solely through Western art history without understanding contemporary art, postmodernism, feminism, or post-colonialism. The debates didn't seem much concerned with an anti-oppression or anti-capitalist framework, but were rather like putting stakes in the ground around the ideas of ownership, value, and talent that are linked to privilege and access to education. So this idea of what an artist is, who's an artist, what art is, just felt so heavily invested in the mythology of the artist as genius, as creator, in these ways that, you know, the art world has moved well past in some ways. But again, came back to this idea of value, like money, like, okay, wait, what we define as art is what makes value, what makes money. And that to me was like, this seems really disconnected for me. And yeah, this was another installation that I created. So I made this fort where the videos were being played within. A lot of the videos are about trauma, and yeah, there's this setup with many different images and bringing things back into the physical. So I paired the images with the physical materials. Oops, there's peeking into where the videos are playing. But also with my ceramics, like I've made a lot of hand-produced, hand-built ceramics, and the glazes, like there's something kind of playing between the two materials that I think is interesting. But again, to kind of accentuate the false construction of something that looks like a ceramic mask versus the actual physical objects. And environmental impact. This is the big problem. Or one of the many big problems. As companies compete to have an edge over the competition, they train and retrain their models. All of the training and AI use cause serious environmental damage due to the massive energy consumption required. In addition, there is an excessive water use for cooling data centers, resource depletion, metals like cobalt and silicone for hardware, and electrical waste, all contributing to increased greenhouse gas emissions and pollution. So this is an Amazon Web Service data center, and I think it's always hard to imagine a physicality to something that happens online and that is so abstract. You know, hearing the critiques around AI use, I 100% agree, and I'm kind of trying to like wean myself off of using it completely. But I do find it interesting with the research I was doing at SFU that actually, you know, the project that they were working on before we looked at AI was about streaming online and how much damage streaming causes. And I was like equally horrified, but I was like, oh, people don't talk about the environmental damages of using social media or streaming online and things that I do a lot of, and I'm sure many of us do. And so it was interesting to me that like giving this kind of focal point of AI as the enemy also kind of oversimplifies the reality of what our lives are at this point and how complex technology is embedded into, well, everything that we do, and how companies really have control over all the ethical decisions, and that their main goal is profit. It's not, any of our interests are not being put forward. So I was also playing a lot with these images of clowns. So I'm jumping back and forth here. And this show I called Look What the Clown Dragged In. It was a reflection on contemporary politics. And again, just a way to show the videos in relationship to images and material forms. I'm not going to get into this too much, just to show. So could large language models be used as a progressive new tool for digital arts? AI image and video generators are complicit in the theft and environmental damages. Is there any possibility for the creation of ethical AI art? This was something we were talking about quite intensively at Simon Fraser. You know, how could a model be built ethically? What would that look like? What would how would we collect data? What would it be trained on? And basically, Laura Marks is trying to create a tiny language model as opposed to a large language model. Corporations plowed ahead in AI's development without considering any of the political or environmental consequences. Data and artworks were and continue to be used as data sets without the artist's consent or remuneration. Companies continue to compete to create newer and better models without considering environmentally friendly options. Basically, a lot of the companies are waiting. They're not waiting, but the idea is that in 5 years we'll have nuclear power that we can use to power all of this AI, which, yeah, I mean, the amount of damage done in that time period, let alone how would this nuclear power be safe? Not to say it isn't safe at all, but as we know, there's lots of ways that can go sideways. The underlying motivations for production continue to be defined by neoliberal capitalism, great at any cost. But whether we opt in or out, our AI generators are still here and people are using them, as we all can see. So I'm just questioning, this I will drag over into the workshop, but what can AI art do to confront the ethical, political, and emotional impacts of these times? So I'm going to just show you a video that I made with AI, very short, and one by another friend in the community, Künste Cooking. I don't know why we all have such bizarre names.
Media is full, government is full, corporations are full, social media is full. There are no words, there are no words, there are no hours.
It's a little shorty. And I'll just show you, I think Kent's work is like, in some way, trying to look at, I'm not mine. Kent's work is looking at some of the ways that technology exists now and how we are using them for art. But I think we've kind of hit this saturation point where there's been so many people exploring this stuff and just there's so much weirdness out there that I'm like, okay, it's stopped being interesting for me, and I'm curious, yeah, what you all think, but we'll hear that in a minute.
Fuck it up, let it flow, break the walls, let's explode with the echoes of freedom, a symphony of mode. Anti-government, our voices collide. In a world of chaos, it's a wild prize.
Just to give you an idea of some of the stuff that people are doing out there, and again, people who weren't or didn't consider themselves artists before AI came along. All right, that's all I have to say about that for now. Are there questions? Yes.
Yeah, I was just wondering, what are the platforms that you use for AI?
Yeah, I wasn't like a lot of the other people in this kind of community who wanted, like, every day there was a group chat, and every day they'd be like, and now this platform, and now this new thing, and this new, like, they just wanted to try everything new constantly. I was like, I'd get kind of submerged into one, and then I was like, that is what I'm going to play with. Like, I wasn't quite so interested in, like, just trying everything and learning it all. That being said, so I started with DALL-E 2, and then I moved to Midjourney, and then I started using Runway as a video generator, where you can either prompt or you can put an image in and it will generate a video. And then I moved to Kling AI, which is a different platform for video generation, but it allowed for much more stranger and more nuances that look more realistic with the images that you've created. And then, yeah, Udio is a sound generating program that I used, although it was recently bought out by, or like, it's in collaboration with Warner Brothers now, I think, so you can't download what you make anymore. Anyway, things are shifting. I don't really understand it all. But yeah, there's hundreds of different possibilities though, and it's too much for my brain to keep up with. And people have made it their full-time jobs where, yeah, I still have other aspects to my art practice. This isn't fully what I am doing with my life. But thank you. Good question. Yeah, Tom.
I'm just wondering if there's examples of, think of like other medias, like there's organizations or collectives or distribution models, like there's copyleft, or there's organizations like Welte, or there's operating systems like Linux. Is there something like that here that's more like free access and being available?
I feel like, from what I understand, although it's not free, I mean, there are people who've fully constructed their own models. And there's different collectives who've offered different information in terms of accessibility. I'm trying to think, I know Hugging Face seems to be the one that's most critical and most open in terms of you can go in and really find information and really manage it on your own. But there's also scientists at Hugging Face who are doing the most research around like environmental damage. But yeah, this is where I feel like I got sucked in so deeply, and then just trying to pull my head back up to get air, and just being like, the whole thing has shifted so dramatically. Also, when I was working as a research assistant, the amount of like scientific information we were taking in, I unfortunately can't maintain, so we probably did cover a lot of this stuff, but I'm like, it was a bit too much for my brain. But yeah, definitely people are working in other ways.
I'm curious, are you sunsetting or like leaving your AI practice because it's unethical, because of the environmental question or the intellectual property question, in which I think it doesn't think about maybe of a moral panic about like AI is bad, but we're not going to look about streaming or all the data farms that we have out there, or like just like taking planes, but also are you quitting mostly because weird has become boring?
well, weird will never be boring in my world. Like I'm always into weird, but I think there's a lot of different ways to do weird. I think on a personal level that like the compulsivity of it, I just needed that to not be the main driving force. And it did feel like such a strong outlet for emotional processing in many ways. The environmental damage to me does feel unethical, and I'm trying to manage, you know, what ethical position I actually want to hold in the world, and with the reality that we live in a very like capitalist hellscape that we can't escape from. That you know, we can make certain ethical choices in our lives, but there's also a limit to our ability to completely remove ourselves from that. So yeah, I think for me, I'm tired of looking at AI images overall, and yeah, I'm not excited by it. And I guess that's it. I tend to have many different kinds of practices that last for different durations of time, but that like, as long as I'm excited by something, I'm engaging with it, and usually that, yeah, happens for a number of years, but then at some point I'm kind of like, okay, it's time for something else.
You just mentioned that it is no longer exciting.
Mm-hmm.
What specifically has made that practice not exciting anymore?
Yeah, good question. I think the kind of like wow factor of it being so new and strange, and the reward of seeing images that I found really stimulating, it's kind of just hit this point where like now we really can't tell, like there's AI generation that we won't be able to, we can't differentiate from real video or images, or sound for that matter. Like my voice has already been cloned and used, and you know, like it's hitting this place of like frightening. It's frightening. But also, yeah, I just don't find like all that community of people. I think I was interested in it in that sense as well. Like I've been interested in the past in like how social media develops community and identity in individuals, how we engage with it, how we engage with each other through it. So that new community developing around it was really fascinating to me. But now, like I said, they're all having these full careers working for all these platforms and corporations, and yeah, or just continuing to be like, make it weirder, and I'm like, I don't feel like that's saying anything in particular. So even though I appreciate these people's choices and where they're going with their lives, it's just not, yeah, for me it's kind of hit a wall where I don't find it as exciting or meaning producing. But this workshop, we're gonna change that.
I don't think this is so much of a question, but maybe you have some kind of ideas around this. But I think about how this conversation around authenticity or authorship is a conversation that's been happening for so long. It didn't just start, you know, with AI. You know, thinking back to the Walter Benjamin essay about art in the age of mechanical reproduction. And so this is an idea that has been debated for a long time. And I guess I'm wondering if you have any ways, you've talked a little bit about it, but, and I really like your idea about this notion of sampling. I think that's like a really good and contemporary way of talking about it. But if there's other ways that you kind of center or place the AI work within this like conversational lineage.
Yeah, I think I was trying to do that. Like I was trying to bring these articles, you know, bringing heterosterile into the discourse, like trying to bring contemporary art and the history of the last 100 years in art into those discourses with folks, because they were coming without that knowledge. And so, not just the people working with AI, but the people arguing against it. Like there was just so many, yeah, there was so much debate again around ideas of authorship and being an artist and all this in ways that it just felt so dated. So I was trying to bring in as much as I could these discourses and challenge people to think through, you know, where are these ideas coming from. But it also at some point is just kind of exhausting. Because it is a lot, like that's a lot. It's contemporary theory in art is just like this huge field already, and I think for people who are still thinking about before modernism, whatever that was, before modernism again, as that being their understanding levels, like it's difficult when you can't be like, look what happened when the camera was invented, look what happened when Photoshop came along. Like, this isn't the first time we've been faced with these problems in the art world. I mean, I think about the printing press, yeah. I think I also, for me, I would, as a video artist who was trained before YouTube ever was around, I saw the same kind of conflict happen then, that, you know, suddenly YouTube existed and people were really getting interested in video as something you could play with, and of course now we have cameras really accessible. So, you know, suddenly all these different people were playing in new ways and posting their videos, and kind of new forms were coming out of that. But meanwhile, the art world was very much like, don't put your video art up online. Like, if your video art's online, we're not going to show it. Like, having to kind of gatekeep what gets to maintain the like prestige of art, and of course that it's a company at the end of the day. YouTube is ultimately became a very commercial platform that's used in the ways it's used now, but again for profit. And just the idea of these kind of potentials, and then where that potential falls apart, and thinking of the art world also needing to kind of always own the definition of what creativity is, and how culture is produced. I feel like there's something interesting when those things clash, but also depressing. Yeah.
I saw you exhibit work both online and real life exhibitions.
Mm-hmm.
I was wondering if you had a different kind of public response between those two audiences.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, very much so. I mean, also for me, like, you put something out online, people are like it, or, you know, yay, or whatever, and you're just like, it feels not real on some level. It's like, oh, that's happening, something else. When you have a room full of people who are coming up and actually talking to you about the work, or physically, you know, entering into it and engaging with it in these different ways. And certainly different audiences as well, like online. Like, one of my videos is still going viral it's been going for a while, and I'm like, oh, interesting, now all these Brazilian DJs follow me, or like Mexican actors, and like things, you know, I'm just like, oh, it's interesting where this work is traveling to, and who it's finding as audience. Whereas, you know, I have a show in Vancouver, and, you know, there's a very limited number of people who are going to engage with it, but they will engage with their embodiment, which is also obviously a very different experience. So, it's interesting. I mean, I've always been interested in this virality thing online. That's always fascinated me. And also who are the art audiences that engage with art, and how can we get different audiences. So that's why I was always interested in site-specific works, or relational aesthetics, or like I did all those projects in prisons. Interested in art not existing necessarily just for an art audience. I haven't resolved all these problems yet, clearly. But, I didn't think about them.
You were mentioning a small language model being project at Simon Fraser University. Could you maybe talk a little bit about that project?
Yeah, I was working, so Laura Marks is a film theorist who works at SFU, and she had created something called the Small File Festival, and it was videos that were small files. I still don't fully grasp, I shouldn't admit this publicly because I've been working with her for so long, but I did go see the Small Film Festival, and I'm still a little bit confused by the overall project, but the idea being low impact environmentally. So seeing AI start to proliferate, she wanted to create a small language model And we were doing a lot of research and working with computer science folks, and then our team kept falling apart, so I think that put a little bit of a wrench in things, but we were trying to generate a small model that would be more ethically produced, in that the data would come from people's sharing of their works, or however we would frame that, with consent, and that the model would have very limited capacities in what it would do. And I think the idea ultimately was to kind of illustrate what that could look like, and what would it look like to create an ethical, low environmental impact model, but also as a highlight to be like, this is not what is happening. This is not what all these companies are doing. That, you know, there has to be some middle ground that could have been had, or could be had. Yeah. But yeah, our team kept getting ill, and various things happened, and the whole thing kind of fell apart at the end. So we didn't get to actually complete the model. Though I hope she will continue with that work.
Hi, this is Mariana. That was really lovely. Thank you for sharing, especially that video was fantastic. I just have like one question for you. And we talk about this kind of ethical and political, everything that is going around with controversy. But for you, what will be the most positive thing that we can get from this AI towards art?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Thank you. I do think it's interesting to see people have access to skills that they otherwise wouldn't have access to. I understand how that could become a threat to people's jobs in certain ways, but I also think it's really democratic in another way to be like, you don't have to have access to film school, and have access to having a budget for your film, and that there's ways that people could suddenly access expressing themselves through these different ways that hopefully will inspire people to then be like, hey, I could do this, in this other way, that it doesn't ultimately just land, that it just continues to be AI, that maybe that the idea of possibility and potential of having a creative voice could lead people away from that as well and into other ways of making art. Yeah, there's a lot of negative things I can think of. Sorry, there's so many kind of horrible political realities that are happening in them that it makes it difficult now to even, like a few years ago I was so excited about about how these image generators could be used for art, and now just seeing how, once again, things have ultimately just been there to solidify really horrific political conditions makes it difficult to continue to be excited about it. Yeah. Any other last questions? Got one here? Yeah.
Well, I'm gonna ask a question.
Yeah.
And it's that, well, if it wasn't, like, for example, if you were continuing to do medium, small, large language models, how, what was the last question?
It was like, I have a terrible memory.
What I was gonna say.
No worries. We were talking about is there something that I'm excited about for AI? Yeah.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
So, if we decentralize the conversation from like big companies, like large language models, and we go into like the actual technology, what is it that one would be excited for?
Yeah, I think that's what I kind of was struggling with Laura when we were working together, is I was like, okay, to what end? Like for me, I wanted to go back towards the way we had structured the research department, for example, where everything was very intentionally politically kind of lined up, that there's a way to use small amounts of data and information, but in a way that's very pointed. But it felt like things kind of drifted, and when it's a data set that's like dogs, then I'm like, like, okay, we have a small data set and they're all dogs, but then to what end? Like why? So I guess for me, it was like, what's the conceptual framework that we bring into play to make a small language model interesting? What's most interesting to most people about large language models is that they can replicate a face or a hand or a gesture, that they can replicate something that looks somewhat authentic or looks physical or looks possible, not just kind of abstracted digital colors or something. And that is what it seems like a small language model would more or less have to do, is just like have one task, and that task be very limited. But I feel like what I was excited about was the potential to be more pointed than that, and that there be something in the way people interact with it that produces collective dialogue and meaning making, not just drawings of dogs. So I don't know, yeah. Good question though. Yeah? Oh, yeah, I think we're gonna wrap before Raphael. So another question you can ask upstairs. Because we are going to, I don't know how many of you registered for the workshop? Any of you? Yeah, some of you? Okay, we've got some of you here. Okay, thank you all for coming to the talk. Sorry I'm not able to answer all the questions. It is a massive field and it's hard to get my head around. I'm not a computer scientist. Yeah, I hope there's lots for you all to reflect on down the line. And then for those of you participating in the workshop, we are going to experiment together now.